welcome everyone, thanks for coming. Yes. So I thought I'd briefly get us to introduce ourselves, maybe say a few sentences. You don't need to hear from me, I'm not the interesting one here. But maybe if we just go down in line and if you just say a few things about yourself.
I'm surprised to learn that I'm here representing executives. That's a little terrifying. I am an accidental CTO at best. But my name is Charity Majors and I work at Honeycomb, and I have historically been responsible for everything everyone else doesn't want to work on. So mostly databases, but recently observability.
Yeah, hi, I'm Birgitta. I am based in Berlin, Germany. I work for Thoughtworks, like James, and I currently have this role that Sven was just talking about that we call Global Lead for AI-Assisted Software Delivery. And in that role, the most frequently asked question right now is, yeah, but how do we measure if the coding assistant is actually doing something for productivity? So I have a lot of practice recently talking about that topic.
Hi, my name is Michaela, and I've been studying software engineering teams, working with engineering teams for many years, first at university, then at Microsoft Research. And since a couple of years, I'm doing that independent, which is great. And the recent study that we did the last 3 years was developer experience, which is a little bit the shift away from productivity. So I'm super excited to talk about that today, yeah.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I was at Thoughtworks for about 10 years. I got paroled in 2009. I've been independent since for the last 15 years. So I go into organizations of various sizes and shapes and cause mischief. And a lot of the work I do is about helping organizations work better, be more effective. So it turns out I have opinions about developer productivity. So let's see where that goes.
Okay, excellent. So I guess we'll start off with the first question. The way this is going to go is I've got a bunch of things here to talk about, and I'm going to desperately try and herd cats, because it turns out people have got opinions. Okay, so the first thing, and I don't know who wants to take this first, talk over yourselves, I don't mind. Why do we measure productivity at all? There we go.
Because everybody's always asking us to. If you want resources, you have to explain why you want. I do represent executives. Look at me. Yeah. No, you want resources, you have to tell me what you're going to do with them. And then how do you know that you're doing what you think you're doing? And honestly, it's a really frustrating question to be asked. And so it's tempting to just think of them as the bean counters and everything. But it's incredibly important that we ask these questions. Every time we've gotten together and tried to figure out what to talk about, it just devolves into chaos, which is fun. But last night, like the quote that came to mind for me was, it's the one Eisenhower said about how every plan has been useless, but the act of planning is essential. Like that's how I feel about developer productivity.
I think the why is interesting because my experience is there's typically several variants of why. There's the genuine, like the charity kind of, I'm going to invest a bunch of money in getting an outcome, and what's the best way of shifting the odds in my favor so I'm likely to get a good outcome. You then get like the other end of the spectrum where you have a thing called stack ranking, and a stack ranking is hilariously ill-conceived, right? It says we're going to take all of the people, assume they fit on a bell curve, and we're going to cull the bottom 10% or whatever. Okay, and huge companies from like Microsoft to Intel to all these huge companies have had this like policy of doing this over decades. And I think when I first heard about stack ranking, I was absolutely staggered because what it says if we hire people and in terms of their ability they fit on a bell curve, it means we're hiring people at random, right? If I genuinely, all of my people's ability fits on a bell curve, my recruiting process is a mess, right? I should be hiring people who are all at that end. All my people should be at that end, otherwise I'm doing it wrong. And at that point, when you start saying, well, who are the weakest performers out of that? And I was just saying this in my talk. When we're managing teams and managing systems, managing people, we're not managing people, we're managing a system of work that has people in. And so developer productivity to me is not a developer individual characteristic, it's a characteristic of the system of work. If I want better productivity from that system, I need to think about how to make that system work better. And I think that's the only sensible way to look at like organizational effectiveness, unfortunately it means I don't get to sack people.
Can I jump in and say a little bit about what I think why people measure productivity? So I've been measuring, have done a lot of data-driven projects, a lot of research, very often quantitative and qualitative, a mixed research approach. And I think productivity is something that people think is easy to measure, right? There is the data right there in our systems. A lot of people that are measuring then are engineers. And so we get this data and it's really hard to measure creativity. It's hard to measure learning, right? It's hard to measure even performance. What does performance mean? What is the difference between performance and productivity, right? I mean, we could go into that in depth. What is the outcome of our organizations, right? And productivity is most of the time measured by activity, right? And that's the default measure that a lot of people gravitate towards. Is a terrible measure most of the time, right? I mean, it depends a little bit on what you're looking at, but as its own, and this is where maybe, if you have heard of SPACE comes in, right? This is a framework where we think about productivity. It's developed by Margaret Unstory and Nicole Forsgren, both very excellent people. And there you say, right, and we have been saying that in empirical software engineering for years, right? There is no one single metric for productivity. You have to at least have a bunch of metrics, right? Different dimensions that you are looking at. But what are people doing? Well, I can count the commits, right? I mean, I can get a sum. And then we can count them, right? We can maybe aggregate our user stories, right? We can look at lines of code. I mean, I think the most terrible measure ever, right? Or lines deleted, right? Would be probably better. So I think that it's the gravitation, and I see that also, I mean, this is human nature, right? We see that in research as well. What can we measure? What can we do? And productivity is just right there. And it's also coming actually from an industrial revolution idea, right? Where we are factory workers, we are doing things, we are measuring how many pieces in what time could be. But that's not what software engineering is about, right? Software engineering is about knowledge work. And actually with AI, and now I'm bringing a completely different topic into it, right? With AI, it's even more about knowledge work, right? The whole cumbersome or very tedious task around boilerplate code will even go more away, right? So it will be even harder to measure activity by activity, right? And so that's what I think.
Or you can argue it would be even easier to measure it by activity, right? Because I can generate a lot of code and a lot of commits using Gen AI tools.
I'll fix myself a minivan. And I think this also leads to like another reason like why we measure it, because the way we define how we measure it helps us create a shared understanding of what we care about in the organization, right? Like if we like kind of from top down say we care about activity, then people will care about activity and they will do that, right? But if we go to other metrics and show that we value them and also show how we interpret them, that creates a shared understanding of what's important, what we want people to do, right? It's this like double-edged source of measuring people to give them incentives, right? Because they might do what the measures tell them, and they might do what the measures tell them to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, so like there's a risk here, which I think I see a lot, which is when like, okay, putting my like CTO exec hat on, like I say, I want to understand productivity and everything, and then what I hear from managers and directors is, well, you can't do that, and this doesn't make any sense, and that's stupid, and you can't do that, and like I think that like the takeaway is it's easy to just go, well, nothing works and nothing matters, so like fuck it, or well, just pick something, and both of those are, and like, so I feel like we need to come back equipped with an alternative or something that we want to, a starting point, it's going to be imperfect, whatever, but it's not enough to just pick apart all the ways that management is wrong. You also have to like propose something with all the caveats and we'll update, we'll be transparent and everything, but like, I feel like this often gets bogged down in all of the very valid critiques that we have about the immediate ways that people want to do this.
So I'm a huge fan of this. I think, and I don't know, some of you might come across, McKinsey came out with an article about a tool they were trying to shill, and the way they shill a tool is they produce a white paper that says you need this tool. And this was about measuring developer productivity, and I had a bit of a response to that. If
you haven't read that, search it up because it's awesome.
A good time. Crack a bottle of wine Thursday night. Just like go to town. It's good.
The point of it wasn't just to kind of rip this thing to pieces. I was trying to be constructive, and to Charity's point, it's not enough to have an away from. We have to have a towards, right? And so when someone says, when a charity, when a CTO says, I want to measure developer productivity, I'm looking for the question behind the question.
Yeah.
Right? What is it you actually want to understand? I want to understand that I'm pouring all this money into this black hole and nothing's coming out, and I want to know why, right? Well, you can't know why is a rubbish answer.
Yeah.
And it's also wrong. But again, it's if we start looking at it as a system and measuring it as a system. So really simple, I got loads of really simple tricks, like value stream mapping. Measure the work going through the system, not the workers doing the work, right? If I track the work items, you learn all kinds of crazy stuff. And I did Bank of America, it's long enough ago, I can say it's Bank of America. We had something like 450 engineers across 2 locations, and they were stuck, in the way that engineers get stuck. And within a year, we had doubled the throughput of that whole organization, halved lead time, because that's just maths. If everything takes half as long, you get twice as much done. No loss of quality. That was an absolute golden rule. We're going to have we're not going to do this by cutting corners. Same tech stack, same people, same org, same stuff, just doing different work, right? And the following year, because they were getting the hang of it by now, they doubled it again. So within 2 years, we've got a 4x improvement in, and this isn't like work items. This isn't like, this is business change things that the CTO is coming along and saying, I want to drop a bunch of cash on making this part work better, on reducing the errors over here, on some tangible business outcome. 4 times as many of those going through by looking at the right things. So you absolutely you can measure organizational effectiveness, but it's about, and I think actually the knowledge work thing is a bit of a red herring. It's not about knowledge work, it's about the fact that you have teams collaborating on things.
And when you have
a team collaborating on things, some of those team members' jobs is just to lift up other team members.
Yeah.
And their contribution is invisible, right? But you take them out and that team will fail.
There's another thing that I think people often hear when you're saying all of these very valuable things, which is that, so you're telling me nobody's ever wrong and nobody ever gets fired? And it's like, no, there are HR problems that need to be dealt with. There are people who need to be coached, who need teaching and everything, but those are actually completely separate from the system's productivity questions. And 95% of your job as an engineering leader, especially if you're not a manager, but is about the system. And it's about those feedback loops. It's about, like Daniel was saying, looking how the work is streaming through the system. This is why I feel like, senior leaders, some are ICs, they're focused on the systems, on the work. Some are managers, they're focused on the systems, but also on the people, right? This is where a manager's job is to coach individual members of the systems. And sometimes to go, this isn't a fit. Sometimes it's because they're not doing enough work. Most often it's because it's not a good fit, or they're not happy in the work that we have for them, or they're tearing everyone else down, or they're throwing cogs in the system or something. But those are systems problems, but they're separate from working on the system. Is that making any sense?
It makes a lot of sense, yeah. I was going to ask about DX, and because I know we've had, is it called DevEx 360, which is one of the tools on the Thoughtworks tech radar, and obviously that's talk. Well, using the tool, you're able to it's a survey-based tool to get sentiment analysis. You can do sentiment analysis and stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, so DX is a tool that's more or less covering the research that I've been doing with Avi Noder and Margaret and Story, and then later on there was also Nicole Forsgren and Irini and Brian. So you can look that up there. It's actually open access to it, so you can have a look at it. It's a little bit different. It's a shift, right? It's a shift away from DORA, which is performance delivery idea behind that, right? It's away from space, which would be, again, productivity and how the dimensions, how we can look at that, to really what drives the experience of people. And experience we can see through the trilogy of mind, right, in psychology, which is feeling, thinking, and value. And this is our systems, right? So the IDE that we have, how our tests are, how is our code base, is it understandable, do we have tech debt, right? A lot of people think about developer experience with that, but it's also about our colleagues, right? It's about our feedback loops, as Charity said, right? How fast are they? The automatic one, the human one, the semi-automatic one, right? It's about connection, about communication, but it's also about product management, right? And so what we did in a study, in a grounded theory study, we really deep dived into what kind of factors are there that impact developer experience, right? And then we came up with measures to measure that, right? Not in a quantitative way that we have been doing this for years, right? That we are getting system data, we're getting the commits, we are getting the churn data and all of that, right? Or how people communicate. But here it's really about perceptions of the people, right? So how productive do they feel? Or how do they feel about their tech debt, right? And if we look at research behind that, perception data is actually quite reliable, right? And so when we measure that, we can actually see how the organization is doing, right? And as a next step, so there's this DX which helps you to do that, right? You could write your own questions and use a survey tool for that, right? But question design is quite tedious task, right? So if you have to ask the wrong questions or you word them wrong, you are not getting a good answer. So DX taking that a little bit away. So you have really a very solid set of questions. But what we did also in our research is we looked at, well, now we can measure developer experience, and now we can correlate that, right, with things with outcomes like tech debt. We correlated that with creativity, with learning, and we could actually see that those things.
How did you define tech debt, if I may ask?
Well, you can have, actually it's everything is there, right? So it's all open access. I can't tell you exactly the question because all of that is questionnaire based, right? So we had like hundreds of developers respond to our surveys based on we measured first developer experience and then we measured what they think about their tech debt, right? And so we let them rank their perception of the quality of their software system, right? The same, for example, for profitability, right? We also checked that, obviously, with other interviews, and with that we had the data on the companies that we worked with. But then you can actually statistically correlate the questions and the answers that people gave to, how likely are they going to rank the tech debt or the learning that they're experiencing in their work, right? And obviously there's always subjectivity in it, right? So we also had, for things like tech debt, we gave them definitions, but the questionnaire is there. So
this is what always amuses me about the DORA metrics. Is it's based on surveys, right? Survey results.
The same, yeah.
And suddenly you have organizations saying, right, we need to measure cycle time to the half hour, right? Or we need to measure mean time to recovery to the, this was like, finger in the air, it's like 3 days or something, right?
Spending 3 months to set up some tool and integrate it with your issue tracker and everything, right? And then it's like, But I think, so this is also what happens in those situations I was mentioning, everybody asking, but what is the return on investment on a coding assistant or something? And I mean, overwhelmingly, all of the developer surveys, the public ones, the ones that we've done in Thoughtworks, the ones we've done with teams at our clients, overwhelmingly the surveys say, we like this tool, we want to keep using it. You can do some creative questions like, I read somewhere a bank did a question in their survey like, if you could choose between a monthly $50 lunch voucher and keeping GitHub Copilot, which would you choose? So they kind of try to really go for do you really like this, right? But then I always get, okay, that's the qualitative data, but how do I know if the productivity increases? And usually what people mean when they ask that is, how do I know if we're faster? It's and then the proxy variable for being faster is story cycle time, which is it's a good, again, what you said, right? It's good to look at it, but it's all about how you interpret it, right? But in the end, why don't you believe people when they say this for a tool that costs less than 0.1% of what the team costs? Why not? And then I think your recommendation at DX is also to then complement those, right? The qualitative data, complement them, and then together with the quantitative data, and then together they paint a picture, but it's not like you can represent everything just in a number, right? Or 10% or 55%, or what does that mean, right? Yeah.
But it's also, I think, I don't want to go too far afield, but organizations are pretty bad at knowing what they want in general. It's really difficult to know what you're asking for. It's much easier to be how fast did we get there? Sorry, that's way too far afield.
I was at somewhere 2 weeks ago, and I had a room full of about 200 people, and I asked them, how many of you in this room could ascribe value at all to any of the work you're doing at the moment? And not a single person could put their hand up.
And yet, in aggregate, there is. And some are clearly better than others. And some organizations are clearly way better than other organizations.
One thing I've really found super interesting, I was working with Dan some time ago. You don't want to hear my voice, I'll keep out of this in a sec, but I was working with Dan. It relates to this survey question. So one of the surveys I think we ran had a third question on it. It wasn't, I think we were asking, it's about capabilities, like how good do you think you are at this thing? How good do your teammates think you are at this thing? And that's where most of these surveys stop. But the third question, which I really liked, was, and how much do you like doing this thing? So it's like, hey, I'm like really good at API design. My colleagues think I'm brilliant at API design. I've been doing it 20 years and I hate it, right? You know, it's like in terms of developer experience, that's not that cool, right? But that was a real eye-opener for me in terms of team and habitability, in terms of how people think about working with code.
Yeah, but so much more often, what we are good at, we love doing. Like there's this emotional feedback loop that is I mean, that does happen, but I feel like part of the reason the space framework is so powerful is because of that intense like link between I'm doing this, so I'm leaning in because it's good and I like and I want more of it.
So I like actually the idea of, do we know what we want, right? Because for everything that we measure, this is a super important question, right? And this is also what, when we're doing research projects or when I'm working with organizations to really understand where the bottlenecks are, right? It's so easy to jump to what you have lying around, right? What kind of data do we have already there? And then
what's easy to measure?
Yeah, what's easy to measure? What kind of things do we have there? But it's really important to start with the goal, right? So what is our goal? What do we want? And this is really important, right? And also the expectations, even for, I mean, I'm now switching a little bit the topic, but for example, for code reviews, right? If teams are doing code reviews and they have a horrible developer experience, right? They have slow turnaround times, productivity goes down. Very often they don't have aligned expectations on why they're doing that, right? What do we want to accomplish? And then if you don't know that, your practices are not matching, right?
Yeah.
So you're doing stuff and people know it's useless, right? Because you're not matching up what's the goal behind, right? And the same for the metrics. When we want to set up success metrics or criteria, we have to know what we want, right? Why are we doing code reviews? Or why are we
so
doing
often
this?
when we're building things, we don't actually know what we want until we get there. You know, I mean, the easy jobs are the ones where I know what I need to do, I'm going to do the thing. The difficult ones, you don't know exactly. It's this sort of push-pull process of, well, I'm figuring it out as I go. It's not yet repeatable.
I think that's okay. Like, so, when I've been involved in this kind of work, right, not nearly to the detail that you have, I'm looking for signal. Right, so I'm not going to ask about tech debt. I'm going to ask, how confident do you feel working in this code base? I'm terrified to go into this code base. How confident are you that the change you make is going to have the effect you want and not have any unintended consequences? How confident are you even what this thing even does? Right, and those sorts of questions, where they're all going like, not at all, right, I'm hearing tech debt. Yeah. And again, how quickly do you get stuff done? It's eye-wateringly slow around here. They don't know how to speed things up, but they can tell you. And a huge amount of it is they don't know what they don't know. So what I do is I go, why don't we try these things? And they're like, I've never even heard of those things. We're so busy looking at the cogs in the machine. We're not looking at the things going through the machine. And you shift your view from that to that, and you go, so all along we could have been doing this. And I don't have to do anything after that. I just go.
One of the biggest obstacles, I think, to people having a better time at work, moving faster, all these things, is that they don't think they're good enough. Or they think that it's harder, when in fact, the slow way is the hard way. If you're good enough to ship software in 2 or 3 months, I promise you are good enough to ship software in 2 or 3 hours, because it is so much easier. It's just that if you haven't seen, organizations that are able to work very quickly, like they didn't invent it. We learn it from each other, and some of us are lucky enough to have worked, at places that did it really quickly, and so we kind of bring it along with us. But it's not because you're not smart enough. It is actually so hard to do things the slow old way. And a lot of people just don't believe that they are good enough.
I think that's a great point to start thinking about the next question, which is around the future of developer productivity. Now, I was at a talk by Eric Meyer a couple of weeks ago where he insisted that programmers are going to go away, and that Gen AI is going to take all our jobs. It is Eric, and so he can get quite hyperbolic about these things deliberately. He said it was his job now to create a startup that was going to cause the death of agile software development. That was his quote. So
Safe
discuss.
already did that.
Is Gen AI going to eat all of our jobs?
You're looking at me, right? Yeah.
I am.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, with the role I have right now, a lot of people ask me this question, right, where it's going, and I'm actually, as a person, quite uncomfortable being a futurist, right? So I'm having a hard time. There's so much speculation right now, and we're all very confused because these large language models are so unpredictable, right? And we've had a few instances now where we've all been very surprised, like, oh, I didn't think it could do that, right? Like 2 years ago, I knew GitHub Copilot existed, but I wasn't looking at it because I was like, can't imagine that that's any useful. That sounds weird, right? So I think that confuses us in like, you know, one day we hear from somebody like Eric who's like, oh, you know, we're all not going to program anymore. But then the next day you go and you actually use something and you're like, yeah, but how does it actually work? Like, I don't get it, right? So I do think there's like a lot of potential with this like assistance idea, right? Like actually making us a lot more effective at what we're doing. And also, I think there might be something where in some use cases, in some areas, in some categories, we can get a lot further than in other categories. So we also don't have to think about it as like, how does it change all of programming? We can also do, how does it change front-end programming, back-end programming, embedded, you know, in this use case, in that domain. So there might actually be different ways, right? So I'm more of a skeptic. So I'm very skeptical of the whole like natural language is our new abstraction level on top of everything. I think of it more as a lateral thing where this tool helps us, assists us on all of the abstraction levels, and that's how we become more effective. But I'm happy to be proved.
I was going to, as soon as we have actual scientists here, I was going to see if I can do some science. Not really. So put your hands up in the room if you're currently using something like a Copilot day to day. Okay, that's probably under half. Keep your hands up, keep your hands, come on. Thank you, keep your hands up. Put your hands, leave your hands up if you think it's significantly improved your ability to write code day to day. Okay, I'd say most of the people's hands came down then. That's kind of interesting, right?
It is, yeah. Still, everybody wants to keep it, so.
So, okay, we're clearly in a massive hype bubble at the moment. Definitely, and what's hilarious is that all of the compute that was doing blockchain a minute ago is now doing LLMs over here. So at least we're reusing it. I tend to be healthily skeptical of these things. What I've seen in my lifetime, in my working lifetime, and you know, and you can pay it back through history as well, the technologies that succeed are technologies that help people do work better, right? So calculators came along, they didn't replace accountants, they just meant that we got a lot fewer of those kind of basic arithmetic errors. Computers came along and they didn't replace administrators, they made admin much easier. In the same way, we've got these, you know, intelligent agents and whatever, and again, sadly, you know, AI is starting to mean large language models in the same way that Agile started to mean just Scrum. So there's lots and lots and lots of other types of basically high school stats being used in interesting ways, right? So, you know, protein folding is this insanely complicated thing, and there's some really cool stuff going on in there. Genetics and genetic zoology and a whole bunch of really cool medical research is going on with very, very sophisticated models doing things that, like, I know, cancer diagnoses and being very, very accurate at those. And then large language models, I love Professor Emily Bender calls it stochastic parrots, and it's just such a brilliant term. You know, it's a stochastic parrot. It's very, very good at mimicking things. But would you rather listen to the parrot or listen to the people who were in the room having the conversation that the parrot overheard, right? So
it depends on the situation, right?
Yeah,
like, so again, this like, yeah.
But but like, you know, Taiki Ono in the 50s was saying, the father of Lean, Toyota production system, he talks about automation, which is like automation with a human touch. And he says, machines don't build cars. People build cars with machines. So if you have better machines, you can build cars better, right? But it's still humans at the end of the day doing the work.
Yeah, I really think that the generative AI stuff is just expanding automation from primarily mathy workloads to now wordy workloads as well. Like it can do a lot of stuff that we've done, automate. Like I read this piece in the New York Times, they're hand-wringing about how they're going to stop hiring these armies of interns to be systems analysts, because what were they doing? Well, they were converting Word documents into spreadsheets or into like Keynote or PowerPoint, and it's just like, they couldn't automate that already? Like, okay, I guess we need LLMs to do that. Cool.
They were having a great time doing it.
I don't know, they were having so much fun, And so like, yeah, like the job ladder is gonna get, it's gonna change, whatever. LLMs are gonna get better and better, but like, I feel like the right way to think about them is like an autocomplete that's getting better really fast. Also, like, think how smart you had to be a software engineer in 1965 or 1972 when you had to handle memory allocation. I'm going to allocate 4 characters and then I'm going to have to remember to reap them or I'm going to get a memory leak. Like most of us, I would not be a software engineer. I'd be like falling asleep in math class.
Yeah, but now we have to understand 500 microservices and which one failed to lead to that. That's, that's pretty
fun.
Complicated.
I don't know. All right, to each their own, I suppose. But like we are moving, like your level of having to understand things is shifting, right? Like nothing that we have that makes up the computer systems. So when I got started, when I got started, I remember ringing to get a taxi to take it down to the data center to plug and unplug the MySQL primary, right? I had to know so much stuff about internals of motherboards and I don't think about any of that stuff. Someone does though. Someone now does it way better than I ever did. And it's just like this fractal expertise where we're covering more and more surface area to make it easier for more and more of us to get things done with computers. I think there's a huge future for low code and for no code and for medium code and for deep, understanding of database and low level, like all of it is going to need to be done. But like making it easier and easier for average people to do more stuff is awesome.
Yeah, I'm actually a real big fan of AI, right? I mean, I see definitely that we have the ethical implications and we have to make sure that the data that we feed with the biases and all of that, right? And there are threats and it's not good at the moment, right? Like what's coming out for some areas, but for code generation, I think I'm fascinated by it, right? I have an 8-year-old who taught himself to program in Python within 3 months, just using ChatGPT, right? And he implemented a little web server, he implemented a tiny compiler, right? And the code that came out, right, it's not production code, right? That's coming out of ChatGPT,
Thank God.
right?
I didn't write production code when I was first copying and pasting from the internet, definitely not.
Yeah. But the way that you're interacting is really different. The way that people can learn and can understand things is very different. He would not be able to do that with Google. He would not be able to do that with Stack Overflow, right? But he's able to do that, and he has a deep, deep understanding of compilers, right? I mean, he's not writing the best code, but he has an understanding of compilers without me. I mean, I was not there
He's
teaching
also 8.
He's 8, yeah, right. And,
cut the guy some slack, he's 8.
But I'm really amazed because he's a kid that he doesn't want to be taught, right? Like you cannot tell him anything. He does it on his own. And I mean, obviously he's a kid, but I think he's representative of a bunch of people that learn in a different way, right? And some other people like to Google it or to search it, right? Or to go to a blog post and read it or watch a YouTube video and so on, right? But it's a different way of consuming and learning and understanding the world. And I think it's fabulous.
I want to just pick up on something there about it wasn't the code that was the interesting part, it was learning how to do stuff.
Yes.
And I think we've been doing some quite interesting stuff internally around how we can use Gen AI throughout the software development lifecycle, not about writing code, about how we can, our awesome analysts can be more effective awesome analysts, for example, and explore domains more effectively and these kinds of things. And I think that's definitely, I think, somewhere where there's going to be interesting use cases for this.
Yeah, I mean, we're only doomed by AI if we decide to be doomed by AI. And there's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy angle to this. If we're just like, well, Gen AI is going to take all the way junior engineering jobs, so let's not hire junior engineers because nobody's going to, well, then of course we're doomed. So like, let's just not do that. And I want to make just a brief plug. I wrote a long-ass piece a couple days ago talking about how we need to hire and train junior engineers. This is not just, like there's this perception out there that, yeah, hiring junior engineers is a great thing, but it's a long-term thing and therefore someone else should do it. But it actually makes teams better in the near term, in the long term. And every place that in order to understand this, you have to be close enough to the code to understand how engineering systems and teams work, which means us. Like, I don't know of any place that has a great, junior engineering feeder system where it was brought in by an exec or by a consultant. It comes from people like us. So
I have an example of this. I was giving a talk earlier today about a chap who's, I said I've worked with a lot of really good programmers, he's the best one, and a bit about why he's the best one. But we were in this very small, very high-performing team. I think we were like 4 people at this point, or 5 people, all very experienced engineers, all knew each other from over the years and whatever, very, very tight-knit team. And as an experiment, we took on 2 grads, two new kids. And we were like, how's this going to work? Is this going to work? And they came in, it was in a trading context, and it's kind of cool because they took on a couple of TAs, they're called trading assistants at the same time. And they have this like 6-week, I think it was 6-week, like immersion in trading to learn trading. And we sent our guy, our new fresh programmer, off to do the trading training, because then they're going to learn the domain, at the same time as the TA. And of course, because it's a trading thing, everyone's betting. So we're now betting that our guy is going to score higher in the trading quiz at the end than their new TA. And so, they have to go off for 6 weeks, and they both know that there's this bet. And at the end of the 6 weeks, the trading assistant scores like 96 out of 100, which is unprecedented, right? Our guy, 97. But no, they came into the team, these 2 guys, and they got it. They got it, they got up to speed quickly, they learnt the stuff quickly, and we were doing, like I say, some really unintuitive, crazy-ass stuff, just how we worked. And what we realized after about 6 months, because the learning curve wasn't, this is going to be really hard. They just got up to speed. Full pairing, lots and lots of, just solving puzzles together. So it's not like we're sitting at a computer doing pair programming. We're sitting at a computer solving a puzzle together. And it turns out that young, smart people are young and smart, and they have opinions, right? And after about 6 months, we were like looking at each other going, we've destroyed these 2 kids for working anywhere else. They're never going to be able to work anywhere else now. They're going to go in exactly what you're saying, Jared. They're going to go and they're going to go, why is it so hard to get stuff done around here? It takes months to do what I used to do in hours.
I think that brings up, sorry, Birgitta, after you.
Yeah, I wanted to go just briefly back to the AI thing, just in terms of like generally like you in the room, right? Like the future for your profession or something. I think one thing that's important is that even if you're a skeptic, like that you go and use it for a bunch of different things. And I was already like, I just had my talk in the other room before, and I was talking about this book that I really like by Ethan Mollick, Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI. And one thing that's really interesting in there, he talks about this thing that they call the jagged frontier of generative AI. He was kind of saying it's almost like what it can do and not do is like a very jagged kind of like fortress. And you will often be surprised by what it can do and sometimes totally disappointed because you thought, surely it would be able to do this, right? So like write a poem with a specific number of words, it fails, but then it writes this beautiful sonnet or something, right? So, and we can only, for us personally, figure out this jagged frontier, what it can do and what not, so we get better at like, when can I use it, when can I not use it, if we use it. So if you like run into these disappointments a few times, still, try to use it for a few other things so you can get a good feeling and intuition, because there's no guidebook like this is what you do with it and this is what you don't do with it. You have to use it yourself to get this intuition of when to reach for it and when not to reach for it. So I think that would be even for the skeptics among you, I hope you maybe give it a go.
It reminds me of there's a brilliant Grace Hopper interview with David Letterman. And he's saying, she was running the, Rear Admiral Grace Hopper was running the US military computing kind of program. And he said, so you were like the experts in computing. She says, no, there were no experts in computing. We were making it up, right? So she invented the compiler because she needed a compiler. I've got to go and invent this thing. And I think we're at that kind of era. It's like LLM. So you're an expert in LLMs? No one's an expert in LLMs. We're just poking them and seeing what they can do.
The first 2 programmers, by the way, 2 of the ENIAC women, they paired. They figured out it was a good idea to pair, and so.
What I also think that with AI, what I see when I talk to people and developers, and is that there's a little bit of a shame in it. like the shame a little bit that comes with looking something up at Stack Overflow, or that you have to Google something, and now, I mean, can you imagine you would be admitting that it's actually helping you to write something that you maybe forgot, right? I mean, for things that you're doing very often, you're probably better, right? But for things that you're only doing once in a while, I use AI for that, right? And it brings me to think about things that I probably know it, right? But it's not on the top of my head. So, and I think this shame thing hopefully will go away, right? It's like an auto-completion. That I see it really as that, right? Like larger pits of auto-completion. It's not going to design you a great architecture piece,
no, it
right?
is not.
It's not making scalable software. It's not even making really maintainable software. I mean, in the small pieces, maybe a little bit, it can actually help really nicely with finding names if you give them enough context what they should look for, right? I mean, it's something that I'm really bad at. If I have to find a name, I always give very shitty name, and I have to come back and think about it again and then rename it and so on, right? So here it's really powerful. But in the grand scheme, I think it's not really making scalable, readable, understandable code. If you think about patterns, right? Design patterns, architecture, and things like that, that's what we have to steer. And I think there's no shame in it, in admitting that's actually really good and in like giving these small buildings blocks that we can put together, right? And I don't have to write those, 3 lines of, I don't know, whatever, opening a socket or whatnot, right? I mean, it can do it quite good.
It's funny because we've gotten, particularly in like the sort of the bigger languages, like your Javas and your C Sharps and whatever, we've gotten really, really used to just leaning on a tool. Right, so Martin Fowler writes this refactoring book in 1996. Within 5 years, a bunch of Russian developers had built a code editor that had all of those patterns in it. You didn't have to manually go through the steps that Martin describes to extract an interface. You just went extract interface. And no one was saying, oh, Charity, man, you're using extract interface, you coward, you bad programmer. You're like, why would you not? Why would you not press the button that says do all of the admin for me? And it's kind of like that. The same people who are going, oh, you shouldn't be using LLMs because that's just bad programming, are the same people who are going, oh, don't take my IntelliJ off me, otherwise I'll kill you.
No, use it, but don't trust it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I heard it really interesting. Again,
Trust and verify.
It was from Eric Meyer. Was in conversation with someone, and the person was saying that he was talking to was saying, but what about all the hallucinations? What about the fact that it's going to produce all these kind of weird and wonderful kind of things? And Eric said, well, what do you think every line of code you write is? Yeah. It's a hallucination. It's just your hallucination, right? And I thought that was like, whoa, okay, that's a mind shift. I am going to change it up a bit now because we've got 5 minutes or so left, and we all seem to be mostly in agreement. So now I'm going to try and see if I can. So we talked a bit about hiring junior developers. So what do we think? How are junior developers going to learn if we're all working from home? Oh. And should we be working from home? Is the question.
Yes.
I'm going to go with it doesn't matter. So I was working with a big Indian company when the world ended. And I had been traveling out there. I was traveling out to Mumbai about once a month for a few days. So most of the work teams I was working with I was working remotely. I would try and pack in as many kind of face-to-face sessions as I could in the 3 or 4 days I was there each month. Then the world ended, and then we're now fully remote. Now they were on a big campus there, and of course there wasn't any point even if I could get there because none of them were there. They're all scattered all over India at home. Nothing really changed. The same people were doing the same work with the same people. I saw a huge uptick in the tech really stood up. Right, the tech really did, so Zoom went from being this kind of quirky little thing that some people use to basically a core work tool, right? Most of the coding tools we were using were pretty distributed anyway, like your GitHubs and your whatever else. And the collaboration stuff, your brain is very good at adapting to new situations. So the fact that someone's on a screen, or there's 4 faces on a screen and that's your team, like for about a minute, that's weird. And then it's just how the team works, right?
Can I challenge that slightly, maybe? So that assumes, right? So that assumes that all humans are the same humans. Actually, they're not, right? So you've got a bunch of 25-year-olds, for example, in London, who are in shared houses. What do they do when they have nowhere to go to work?
I have seen some juniors really, really struggle. And not everyone's the same. I do think remote work is here to stay. Personally, we built our company to be distributed from day one. So I think we're better than most when it comes to, because you can't just like transplant what you're doing in an office to doing from, like you need to put a lot of work into making the implicit explicit. Like I think that offices play a few roles for people that we haven't really dealt with. One is just like the focus. For some people, doesn't matter. Some people, it's really critical. Some people really suffered when the office is closed. Another really big one that I don't think we've even figured out is just like the sort of like the immense amount of context you pick around by just being somewhat close to each other. And like for juniors, absorbing that knowledge of just like overhearing other people pairing and overhearing this and
seeing role models around
seeing
them,
role models, like, you know, I don't think you can replace that with the same kind of fidelity. I don't think it's possible. I think that the best option is probably a hybrid thing where you bring teams together during like the design phase, and then you know, and you be very specific and, you know, with junior folks, just like teach them because they can't watch you. And some won't make the jump. Like some are not going to make the jump, but others who wouldn't have made the jump, who wouldn't have access, will make the jump because they'll have opportunities. But some are going to be left behind.
So I want to pick up on this. There's, I think you're absolutely right. So different people respond to different contexts. There's the thing I'm seeing, which is really frustrating, especially a lot of big organizations, is there's a return to office mandate. And the return to office mandate is literally come into the office, put headphones on, get onto Teams and do
really
all of that
stupid.
remote working, but all sitting back to back in a noisy place, right? So I think where we're saying that it's really important to bring people together to do collaboration, we need to rethink office spaces to make them first and foremost collaboration spaces. And that's going to be, I don't know the answer to that. I know the question. I can put the question pretty well. I've not seen many good examples of the answer. Like the WeWork spaces are generally not great for that. They're designed to be lots of little offices. The onboarding juniors thing, honestly, I've had a very different experience. What we found, and like pairing, like absolutely pairing all the time, and pairing with people whose job isn't just to get the work done, who's like the onboarding the junior, getting them up to speed, getting that osmosis happening is the work. Yeah, and as long as we think of the bringing people up and raising the team up is the work as much as shipping the code is the work, then, and again, it's a culture, it's a bunch of choices that you make and behaviors that you model. It's doable. But I think, I'm going to push back on you have to have juniors in an office, otherwise it's not going to work.
Nobody here said that.
I don't think anyone said that.
Nobody here said that.
My experience has been that these kids are actually pretty good.
We've got about a minute or so left. Birgitta, would you like to have the last word?
The last word, God. I mean, I think this is like a super difficult topic because like both sides, quote unquote, have like there's really good arguments for office and not office. It's not going away, and it's super hard to make it work, right? So, and I think there's still going to be a reckoning or something. There's this New York Times podcast episode like a few months ago where they also cited some studies about people actually being less happy at home, even though they still wanted to be at home. And I also I don't have children, but I totally get it, right? And also how people actually had less interactions with their managers, and it was like harder to actually, work on your career because you had less of those kinds of interactions. So there's all of these implications, and I think we still don't fully see the big negative impacts, or maybe also want to like avoid them a bit, because of course we like that it's more flexible now and it's here to stay. So we're all a bit like, oh, yeah. So that wasn't a good last word, was it?
It was a great last word.
Perfect.
So I guess what have we learned? I'm not sure. I think we learned that you can't measure productivity. That's a thing. That AI is probably the future, maybe, and that we can't solve working from home at this panel. So
basically.
And I think that's us. We're at time. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to the panelists.